Shalom, welcome to Eretz Israel. It's Erev Shabbat, Parshat Terumah, and the Parsha of the Zohar begins with an interesting statement that the Zohar uses to play against another statement, which is very common in all the literature of Judaism, because two sides are always present in any situation, if not more. And we learn that in Shalom Bayis, we learn that in getting along with our neighbors. We learn that there's always two sides, if not more. Well, in this case, the two sides are God and the Jewish people. But listen to the way, the language the Zohar uses to describe God's relationship to the Jewish people and the Jewish people's relationship to God, because it's a two-way street, folks. There's no such thing as just one way. There's always two ways. V'adaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. God spoke to Moses. Daber el bnei Yisrael v'yichuli truma. Take for me. Speak to the people of Israel and take for me a portion. Me'et kol ish, from every man. Asher yitvenu libo, whose heart was volunteering. And the pasuk continues. Rabbi Yechia patach, the Zohar student of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, Rabbi Yechia, who is famous in his own right in the Talmud. Rabbi Yechia says, Ki Yaakov b'char lo yah, he brings another verse, because Jacob chose God. Yisrael es segulato, the Jewish people, for his treasured nation. Now, the word segula has many translations. Some say treasure, some say charm, some say it's part of being chosen, some say it's the nation that would bring blessing to other nations, which of course was Abraham's blessing, that he would be a blessing to others, and if people cursed him, well, then they would unfortunately suffer the the mistake of cursing Avram Avinu and the Jewish people, which we see now before Purim, a few weeks before Purim. We are in a state where Amalek is raising its head again, as it always does every year this time, because the Jewish calendar is not just a calendar of months and days. It is a calendar of decades and centuries and millennium. And the same things happen every year at the same time, because we are on a track of history. It's a spiral through history. We could understand the Jewish calendar. And that spiral hits certain points every year at the same time. And this is the time of year where Amalek raises its head. The people, they're not just people who don't believe in God. They believe in God and they hate him and they curse him and they curse those who believe. And they've raised their head in many nations throughout history. And I'm not going to start pointing them out yet, because I don't want to get into a bad mood before Shabbat. You could find out real easy. But the point is that Jacob comes along and chooses Israel is going to be God's chosen people, because they have a job, because they have a responsibility, and they have a blessing for it. And that's the charm, if you will. And how beloved the Jewish people are before God. Because he wants them. He wants them on the map. He wants the Jewish people to have their place on this planet and this history. And he wants to be attached to them, in the language of the Zohar. It's not enough that you want somebody, you want to be attached to them, but you want to be close to them, you want to be part of their life. And he wants to be in connection with them, which really connotes communication. That God wants to be communicating with us on a regular basis to see what is happening. And God made them a singular people on this planet. Now, this idea of being a special or singular people gets the Jewish people a lot of bad press, or at least a misunderstanding, or jealousy, and that leads to other worse things. But we have to understand that it wasn't always this way. God didn't make the Jewish people right out of the gate. First, he made Adam and a family, and that family split into many families, and those many families split into more families, and the genealogy of the human race is a well-recorded, researched thing. The Jewish people only came along 2,000 years after Adam. When God went into the human race, he said, I better pick somebody real quick to save this human race, or this race is going to go down. And God chose Abraham because of his kindness, because of his approach to religion. His approach to religion was, come in my tent, wash your hands and feet, sit down, have a meal, drink, and we'll talk about God, and then we'll make some blessings, and we'll learn some ideas. Maybe we'll sing a few songs. Then you can head back out to your camels and the desert road. That was the religion. The religion wasn't come into our I was going to say church, but there's more than just churches out there. Our temple, our meeting place, and hear the guy talk and then open up your wallets. No, that's not the way it works in Judaism. First you get fed and you get to drink and you get to talk. And then the preacher will preach perhaps and say a few nice words. But you see, there's a different order here. Judaism emphasizes giving of the physical world to each other before we give over spiritual ideas. And that's all the difference. Because if I start giving you over spiritual ideas without first making you feel at home, without making you feel appreciated and wanted in your home, then how well are you going to receive those spiritual ideas? So God wanted the Jewish people because of Abraham's practices and his students and his children and his grandchildren, etc., because they had this down. They understood the way religion's supposed to work. And he wanted them to be his treasured nation, to teach his teachings. And he wanted to be in connection with them. How do it's written? Ki Yaakov bachar lo ya, because Jacob chose God. But how do it's written? Ki, and it's also written Ki helek Adonai amo. A portion, God's portion, if you will, is the Jewish people, is his people. In other words, God chose the Jews and Jacob chose God. And it has to be that way. There is no forcing a relationship on anybody in this world. A 6-year-old cannot make his neighbor be his friend. A 15-year-old cannot make his, somebody he likes their friend. We cannot force relationships. It has to come from the heart. And you see in a lot of the other types of systems in the world, whether they're religious or whether they're political or whether they're business organizations, there's a certain kfiyah. There's certain jobs in this world that you are forced to join a union. There's certain nations that you're forced to take on the philosophy of the nation. There's certain religions that you're forced to believe a lot of things that are not yet proven to you. There's no forcing by the Jewish people. There's choice, because choice is what makes us human beings. And choice is what makes us potentially divine human beings. And if you take away somebody's choice by forcing them into anything, you're taking away their humanity. And that seems to be quite the opposite intention of a religion in the first place, or having a God. And God gave to the other nations a ruler, a master angel. There's a pantheon of angels in heaven. They're called the 70 Sarim in Kabbalah. Each Sar is a not an independent source of energy, because they're all receiving their energy from Hashem, but he appointed ministers over each of the 70 archetypal nations which were created at the time of the Tower of Babel. And those nations would be assigned their lands, their inheritances, their intellectual powers, their physical powers, and probably a little DNA thrown in for the mix. And they had an angel over them. And you'll see that every empire has its time on top and its time below. And it follows a rather interesting pattern from the Middle East into Europe, across to America, out to Asia. There's migrations are not just movements of people. They're transfers of power from one minister to another. And we're talking about ministerial angels, right? God's cabinet, right? Does that work? So you understand this, you understand well that there is an order to everything. There is no chaos except for in our brain and in our lives because we don't have the order down. But once we learn the order and even try to live it a little bit, or it starts to work, it starts to make sense, it starts to create structure, and structure creates knowledge, and knowledge creates purpose and direction. And suddenly we don't live in this dog eat dog. I don't even like that phrase because dogs don't usually eat dogs, right? They might bite, but that's just because there's a nice steak on the front yard. But the point is, I think you understand that the Jewish people are part of a relationship, and we're here to teach that relationship. And God gave us Shabbat to rest from the expression of our relationship with the outer world and to deal with our inner world. Because the outer world is the 6 days of the week, where Jews have to deal with wherever they are and whoever they're with. But on Shabbat, we have our families, we have our communities, we don't go anywhere, we stay in one place for a day, and we relate to the people there, and we change the tenor of our relationship. And so when you stay home at Shabbat, it makes your weekday a lot easier because you have that home base, which is Shabbat Kodesh. And on Shabbat, to shev, to sit down means you don't get up and run. There's even laws about how fast you should walk on Shabbat. You should walk slower on Shabbat than during the week. Try doing that sometime. If you're a guy that walks fast to your car and fast to your office and fast to your lunch place and fast to your tennis club, try not walking so fast on Shabbat. See what it does. Because when we walk slow, it changes the pace of our thinking. When we change the pace of our thinking, we're free men to think whatever good thoughts we'd like to think. Because the mind is the last frontier. And the mind right now is in a battle between external forces. And those external forces are right in front of us. And whether you want to define it as a religious war, as a political war, as a cultural war, whatever label you give the war is happening in our hearts and in our minds. And we should all know that Shabbat is the purpose of creation, not the war. The war is only because we didn't learn well properly in Sunday school. But we're here to learn now, and we're sharing the Holy Zohar with you. And we're going to be working again. We're going to be looking at the Zohar tomorrow night, Motzei Shabbat Kodesh, and we look forward to seeing you all week long on Patreon, YouTube, Facebook, and a few other outlets. And we look forward also to being in a relationship. We don't force anything, but rather we offer ourselves, we offer what we have to give, and we receive what others have to give. Shabbat Shalom. We look forward to all the upcoming events, and Purim is not far away. That's going to be a special few days. All the best.